An officer suddenly found himself on the wrong side of the law, accused of smuggling two undocumented immigrants. A jury subsequently acquitted him, but his future in the profession he loves is now hanging in the balance. LA Times senior investigations editor Jack Leonard has the story of how a stop at a Border Patrol checkpoint changed this officer's life. Hey, Jack, this story really kills me. Tell us about Mbasa Patara and his background first.
Sure. Mr. Patara came to the United States from Europe. He's actually from Togo originally, but he came to California in 1999. He was working here as a bus driver, and after 9/11, he started to get interested in joining the military and heard that he could become a citizen through that, and he joined the Marine Corps. While he was there, he actually served for a bit in Afghanistan and Iraq, and in 2007, joined the LAPD. By that point, he was a US citizen, and he worked as a patrol officer and a traffic investigator for more than a decade.
So this guy is what we would normally call an American hero, right? A guy who joins the service, he enlists, he fights for our country, and then he goes into law enforcement, you know, another heroic job. And now he's driving to El Centro and gets stopped in a little town called Pine Valley. What happens there?
Right. His attorney described him as the immigrant dream. And so there he is in Pine Valley. He's driving, he hits this checkpoint and he gets stopped. And he's with two men in his car, and Border Patrol asks whether they're all US citizens, and Mr. Patara says that they are. Turns out that the two men he's with were not. They were from Mexico, and prosecutors said that they had crossed the border illegally just a few days before.
So what were they doing in his car?
That's the big question. If you ask prosecutors, their argument was that Patara had gone down to Imperial County, to a casino there to meet with them. This casino, the Golden Acorn, is a known human smuggling hub, and had agreed to bring them across through the checkpoint by flashing his LAPD badge. But Patara says that's not the case at all, that he actually knew one of these men as a handyman from his neighborhood for about 5 years, that they'd shared beers together, and that when he'd called to ask Patara to go down there and to, spend some time at the casino, he thought, yes, he'd go down there, and that he was introduced to the other man as the handyman's uncle.
So the law enforcement agency, the Border Patrol, that stopped him, they're saying, what, you have to check the papers of anybody who gets in your car?
No, but they think that there's enough evidence to suggest that Patara had agreed to bring them through the checkpoint, whether it's a favor or whatever.
But what evidence is there?
Right, okay, and there's very little evidence. And my colleague, James Quealy, actually looked at the court documents, because this made a big splash when the arrest occurred. But very rarely do we actually go back and really dive into a case later to find out what actually happened. And James did that, and he found that there's actually, a real small amount of evidence. The conspiracy, according to prosecutors, is built on these phone calls. And there's a text from Patara's wife, who had gone ahead and had texted her husband to say, be careful, the Border Patrol is here. Patara says he'd never seen the message, although, according to court records, the message had been seen. Then there are, one of the handyman's wife had been calling while the handyman and Patara were at the casino. And prosecutors said that the calls came right before the wife had gone through the checkpoint and then right after the checkpoint, suggesting that she might have been warning them about the checkpoint and what it looked like.
But Patara said he knew one of these men for years who was a handyman in his neighborhood. Is there evidence that that man worked in that neighborhood as a handyman?
Yeah, apparently so. He was in Fontana for a while. And there's no evidence that Patara got any kind of compensation. There's no money exchange. There's no evidence for that. And Patara says that his flashing his LAPD badge was merely a misunderstanding, that he wanted to let them know that, look, I'm fine. I'm an LAPD officer, and I have a gun here, so, don't be alarmed. I'm allowed to have this weapon.
This goes to trial, and what happens?
Well, yeah, this went to trial in February. A jury decided that there wasn't enough evidence against Patara, and they acquitted him. His lawyer was arguing that, look, you've made a case that these people, that the handyman and the other man in the car may have used Patara to try and get through the checkpoint, but you've given no evidence that Patara actually knew that they were here illegally.
And it's pretty scary if you could, go to jail if you gave somebody a lift, a housekeeper, a gardener, people who, you don't check everybody's papers, people, a handyman, right?
Absolutely.
But in terms of his career, this isn't over.
No. So he's acquitted, and he's spent a lot of money on legal bills. And now he has to wait and see what the LAPD does. They're doing their own internal investigation, and their standard of proof is lower than a criminal case. So they could decide that there's enough evidence that he's violated the law, or his behavior during this case warrants discipline all the way up to termination.
Jack, does the current political climate contribute to the zealousness of the agencies and the prosecutors?
That's a good question. We don't know whether it contributed in this case, but over the last, for the first 2 years of the Trump administration, prosecutions for human smuggling rose by 25%. And in California, they nearly doubled.
Well, let us know what happened. Thanks, Jack.